In 1928, a group of men from the north side of Cork City assembled on the steps of the North Monastery School. Their exploits were immortalised in song and in story. They became known as the Boys of Fairhill.
We grew up in Holly Hill, which is on the edge of Fairhill, and we were always terribly proud to think that we were growing up in that area.
The place was spider-webbed with lanes. There was Trimbat's Lane, Bailey's Lane, Fair Lane, Washbrew Lane where I lived, and Fatty's Well. There were huge families, and all half doors, and over the doors there was the compulsory a bird, a canary or a finch, and everybody seemed to have a bird and a birdcage over the door.
Bird catching was a big thing. Well, it's banned nowadays. Every house you come across in Trimbat's Lane or Bailey's Lane or any of these small little lanes down there off of Boys Street, everybody had a bird cage beside the door.
With all the houses and a plethora of little small houses closely together, there was almost an extended family feeling, you know. We all felt related almost, although we weren't, you know. And maybe that led on to why the Boys of Fairhill and Fairhill families and Fairhill people were so close. And, you know, there was a great togetherness and a great camaraderie there, always.
As a strategically important port in the British Empire, Cork had a long tradition as a barrack town.
A lot of the men, because of the way life was, they joined the British Army, and because they got clothes and 3 meals a day and a few pence to spend. In fact, my uncles joined the British Army, and my grandfather was in the British Army, so there was always a great army tradition there. At that time, these men, like they had witnessed the Boer War, the First World War, the 1916 Rising, the death of our two Lord Mayors, McCurtain and McSweeney, the burning of Cork 1920, followed by the War of Independence, Civil War, and they may have even been fighting on different sides, you know. Cork at that time was a hive of political passion. Curfew was 5 o'clock, and there were dances in the Imperial, finished at 4 and in town, and a fella had to walk his girl home or he'd be just shot, you know. And somebody once said in Cork at that time, you did not commit sin, you achieved it.
Many of these men had experienced several wars, but there was one thing that, whilst they had various political interests, different in many ways, bowling and sport was their bonding.
Funny thing about it, whatever their politics, they were inseparable. They were like one family. They were sportsmen, and they were good sportsmen, like.
In truth, the main reason why Fairhill was so famous and renowned was Sean O'Callaghan, a well-known local man, wrote some beautiful songs, and in those songs he always mentioned the Boys of Fairhill, you know, and they're still being sung today.
It was really a great credit to the late Sean Callaghan, who wrote the Boys of Fairhill, who wrote D'Oyly's Armoured Car, who wrote Lloyd George, but he wrote songs that immortalised Fairhill.
A colourful example of Fairhill life at that time is to be found in O'Callaghan's song, Lloyd George.
He had one verse in the song, and it referred to a sergeant. He was a Sergeant Chance, and he was a sergeant with the black and tans. He was a nasty bit of stuff, I believe. He could be a nasty, and without being vulgar, like, I'd leave it at that. But there was one thing about him, he fancied himself as a fighting man. And at that time, they fought bare knuckle fighting. There was no such thing as a round. They fought until they fell. Chance would come up when he'd be on his day off. He'd be drinking in town, and he'd feel like having a go with his fists. He'd walk up Shandon Street, and he'd stand at Confarty's corner, and he'd claim anyone. And he was always obliged. Sergeant Chance fought this man Dan Mack, and Dan Mack actually lived on Fairhill. He lived, I believe, somewhere around Kerry Hall Road, but he spent most of his life in England working on the building sites. Dan Mack happened to have been at home on holidays in one such occasion, so they mixed it anyway for an hour, or well over an hour fighting, and 'twas said that the blood was running down Blackpool. But there's a verse in Lloyd George, and 'tis, there's a man in our club and his name is Dan Mack, and half London town he could take on his back. Now Chance was a brave man, but he had to give in, saying he'd rather face hell than Dan Mack from Fairhill, with me fall-da-dal-da-da-dee, fall-da-dal-da-da-dee, fall-da-dal-day, says the boys of Fairhill.
One interesting aspect of Sean O'Callaghan was that he wrote many songs about all forms of Fairhill life, their republicanism in the different families, the ball players, the harriers, the hunters, and yet he never wrote a song about pigeons, although he was very much into pigeons, and he loved pigeons, and he had his own pigeon loft, and he loved pigeon people. There was one story about him that people used to come over from England. He kept great pigeons. They had a great reputation, and they'd go up to Sean's house and he'd sell them a pigeon for £1. But the unsuspecting Englishman didn't realise that Sean would put wet sawdust into the box, and then he'd put the pigeon in and seal the box with some holes in it. And when the Englishman went back, and halfway out of Cork Harbour on the Innisfallen, the pigeon would claw his way out of the bottom of the bag because it was wet. And like in 20 minutes, he was back in Sean's loft again.
Sean O'Callaghan, I never met him, and he was before my time, but he was a great friend of my father, and he was a kind of a Del Boy of his day, like, and he was involved in everything from harriers to, he even crossed a wood pigeon with a racing pigeon. You know, he was a lovable character at the time.
The Crane family has a long history in pigeon racing, a sport which has always been part of Fairhill culture.
My family, I suppose, we'll be the only, if there's another one, there might be one more, but if there is, I don't know it. We'll be the only family I see to carry 4 generations of pigeon fanciers. Pigeon racing is a fabulous sport. It's a sport associated with the honorary punter, but royalty keep pigeons. There's a big loft in Sandringham. The Queen, she has special rings on them with ER and a crown on each ring.
Michael's grandfather, Nicholas Crane, he was an ex-British Army man, and this Sunday he was sitting down at home during the war, and there was a huge thunderstorm, and suddenly a pigeon flew in the window for refuge, I suppose, and Nicholas caught the bird and he looked at it, and on the bird's leg was a note tied onto it, and a £5 note, and a little note saying, "Here's the money for a cork and tip." There was a bet between 2 people, and he was paying the bet. So Nicholas Julie took off the £5 note and tied the note back on, and left the pigeon off again.
And at the time, I think the pint was only 2pence, and they were drinking for 3 days. It was the best trade I was ever caught in Cork, and people even laugh about that to this day. The ordinary person in the street, they have a very bad perception of pigeons. They see the feral pigeons on the quay, and they assume that all pigeons are the same. But all pigeons are athletes, all pigeons are kept, and they're kept specially, and they're fed specially, and they're trained specially. The best pigeon, I suppose, the most honestest pigeon anyway, that I ever got, was the bird I got off my friend Pat Shanley. He gave me choice at the loft. I actually picked him myself, I suppose, if I can deserve any bit of credit. I suppose I was lucky really, but I picked a lot of them since, and they were rubbish. But this particular day I picked the rifle anyway, and he won 6 or 7 races for me, inland, from Mullingar to Monaghan to Perth twice, Thurso twice, a super pigeon, and he lived to be 22 years old, and he was called after my brother who died during the Thurso race, Josie Boy. We go to Blackpool annually in the 21st of January for 3 or 4 days, and this other fancier was looking after my pigeons when I went away, and last year when I came back he told me that the old cock was after dying. And I said to myself, he probably missed me out of the loft, and being old as he was, you know, when you're missing your owner for a while, I don't know, maybe it was just old age, but I have a feeling that was when I wasn't around, he just passed on.
Oh, come all you fine men, and around me attend, I pray listen to my
breeding and racing harrier hounds goes to the very core of the sporting traditions of Fairhill. The most celebrated hound ever to run for Fairhill was known as the Armoured Car.
No land nor title did he ever own, and he cared not for who you were. He was born, he was bred by the Boys of Fairhill. He was known as the Armoured Car.
About the Armoured Car, he ran in the troubled times. He ran between 1921 and 1927. And that particular time with transport, you might have a lorry or a wagonette was very popular at the time. And you travel, we say, back to a drag now in Inishannon, for instance. But on the way to Inishannon, you'd be stopped maybe by the Tans, they were the troops in Ireland in the troubled times. And they'd jump up in the back of the lorry and see what was in it, and then they'd leave you off again. And that's how he got his name, and that's how Sean Callan rhymed the song. He was trained, I suppose, by that great huntsman, Connie Doyle. And Connie Doyle was huntsman for 40 years. Not alone him, but his brothers, his son, and many of as I say, up to the present day, we still have Niall Doyle involved in the club.
Sean Callan adored Connie Doyle. He was his god. There was one verse in the song, was on the side of Fairhill lives the bold Connie Doyle. A greater sportsman never trod on the soil. All over the country he's adored like a king. All over the country he's adored like a king, and he'll die on the field for the Boys of Fairhill. When he wrote that, he really meant what he was saying.
Speaking about Sean Callan, you have, at the moment even in Fairhill, you have two of his relations. One is Chairman Pat O'Callan, better known as Magic, and his brother Timmy, they're twins actually. But now their grandfather then was Paddy Doyle, and he'd be an uncle of Sean Callan's. So even today, after all those years, where the Callans and the Doyles are very much involved in Fairhill still.
When the Free State Bill was framed and peace was proclaimed and the country slumbered in repose, north, south, east and west, he could not be suppressed, for he cared not for friend or for foe. And when the bow black and tans and their Saxon clans to England sailed afar, with all their guns and rapture, and never could they capture Doyley's armoured car.
Fantastic words, like, for a man that, like, when the Free State Bill was framed and peace was proclaimed and the country slumbered in, I mean, they were wonderful words in my opinion, you know. So there was genius attached to the man.
When you think of it, the history that's involved in it, and the history and the great name that it gives to the north side and Fairhill in particular, and I think we're very proud of that.
With me fall-da-dal-da-diddy, fall-da-dal-da-diddy, fall-da-dal-day, fell the Boys of Fairhill.
You couldn't talk about Fairhill without mentioning the North Monastery School.
The North Monastery was synonymous with Fairhill. Then Fairhill, all Fairhill men, they all attended, practically to a man, attended the North Monastery.
It churned out hurlers like a conveyor belt. It was a huge, huge influence on that whole area.
The North Mon was a great nursery for hurlers. If you were good enough, then you played in the Dr. Callan Cup or the Harty Cup, and I think the brothers put an awful lot into hurling.
In 1920, the country was in turmoil as the War of Independence raged out of control. Despite this, the Boys of Fairhill met the Boys of Blackrock in the Senior Championship hurling final at the Mardyke Athletic Grounds in Cork.
In 1920 was a particularly bad year for Fairhill hurling, because the previous year, 1919, they won the Intermediate Championship, went up senior, and they met Blackrock in the championship, and they were beaten 14-2 to 2 points. People used to always say they were beaten a goal a man, 15 goals, and they also said they burned their hurleys after the game.
It was said after that, if they had a full team, they wouldn't have got such a beating. But the reason for it, that some of them had to make themselves scarce. Because you had people, you had You had people from Fairhill involved in the movement and in the boys. Looking at that photograph again, you could nearly pick out, I would safely say, you'd pick out 6 or 7 hurlers that played with Fairhill in the famous year that they were beaten by Blackrock. You had Paddy Clifford, who was on goal that day for I know it is a fierce admission, but nearly a goal a man.
But yet, a bad defeat can be the starting point for something better. You know, the way you hit rock bottom and there's only one way you can go, that's up. In the following generation, Paddy Clifford's son, Johnny Clifford, who was a hero of mine when growing up in Cork. You know, he won the minor All-Ireland in 1951. He was captain. He was also a hero and a great player with the North Monastery. The Harty Cup was huge at the time. But Johnny, in many, many ways, made up for that terrible defeat in 1920 when he got the winning goal in the last minute in 1954.
From the commentator's box, it seemed that all Ireland was at Croke Park on Sunday, September the 5th, and no wonder, for this was hurling final day. Christy Ring leading his men from the County Cork. What a ding-dong struggle it was. Cork, the holders of the title, settling down best in the opening minutes and laying siege in the Wexford goal, though, mark you, the Corkmen had their moments of pressure too. The spotlight was truly on Christy Ring in his bid for his 8th All-Ireland medal, but this shot was saved by Wexford goalkeeper Art Foley.
It was almost revenge for Fairhill when Johnny got that last-minute goal, and I still remember it. I was at it, and the ball was kind of going wide on the byline, and he pulled with his left hand, and it went into the back of the net.
Johnny Clifford playing the game of his life and sends the ball to the net. Excitement, well, just look.
He saved the day for Cork, as if it was in honour of his father, who tried his best. He tried, and Johnny succeeded. That's the way it seems to me, you know. And he's a Northside man.
Lloyd George, he stands up and he gives a great sigh. Said there's an ancient old place called the Old Croppy Boy, where the Fenians of old, they were trained and were drilled, but the bravest of them all were the boys from Fairhill. With me, fall the doll daddy, fall the doll daddy, fall the doll day, says the boys of Fairhill.
The Croppy Boy to my mother was always the heart of Fairhill, because the Croppy Boy was where Timmy Delaney lived and Jack O'Shea lived. Timmy Delaney was the king of bowlers. He was the champion bowler in Cork in the 1920s.
Tim Delaney was just one man. One as nearly as important as Tim Delaney was the man that showed him road, or the man that threw down the sop, as they call it. They throw down the sop. The sop being a bunch of grass, and they'd move out and they'd place the sod of grass in a certain part of the road, and invariably, I won't say they do it all the time, but invariably the bowl player would land his bowl right in the middle of that sop.
Jack O'Shea from Fairhill, they reckon, was one of the greatest road showers of all time. He was well wanted by everybody. Not only did he guide Delaney, but many others, right down to Tom O'Neill from Blarney Road. Jack O'Shea was the man. He sized up the road, he studied the cambers, and he was the guy that he gave the player extra confidence, and that's what was needed on the day. One of the great occasions on a Sunday morning, crowds would gather along Mick McSweeney's wall, and they'd watch Delaney in practice, and his practice was to loft a bowl, a 28 ball of iron, into a bucket 70 yards away. That was a big occasion, and that was his training.
A chance encounter in Cady, County Armagh secured the legend of Timmy Delaney and Jack O'Shea as two of the greatest sportsmen of their day.
In 1928, there was a Christian brother on holiday in Armagh, came across a number of bowlers bowling along the road, and they were quite surprised when he threw the bowl back. They were quite shocked to think that there was also bowlers in Cork. So when word got back to Fairhill, not alone did it send shockwaves through Fairhill, but it also sent shockwaves right across the county, because at that time, people in Cork felt they were the only people in the world who bowled. So anyway, word came through eventually from Armagh that the great champion in Armagh at the time, Hammerman Donnelly, would challenge the King of Cork bowlers at the time, which was Timmy Delaney. So he said, I'll go to Armagh and I'll take him on. But as soon as his followers heard that, they said, hold a minute, it's 300 miles away and Jesus will be killed up there. So, but Delaney had no fear. He decided he was going to go to Armagh. Delaney headed off by train to Belfast. But during that time then, Jack O'Shea, his great coach, they got a change in mind, and they said there's no way they could leave that man above there on his own. They travelled on to Armagh by car. And they were absolutely stunned when they got to the bowling road. It was absolutely black with people, and the police was there trying to hold back the crowd.
Remember that the game of bowls is the fairest game when played to the rules. When you jump to your tip, it is 2 28-ounce bowls. It is even money. It is a gamble between two fellas. You'll never get that kind of a gamble in sport.
Eventually the score settled down, and in total hysteria, the Hammerman Donnelly led for the first half. But in the closing stages, Delaney, being maybe a little bit fitter on the day, God only knows, but he eventually became victorious. But then the most important thing of all, in defeat, the Armagh people were so fascinated with this individual who came all the way from Cork, and so proud that he was prepared to travel that distance. They shouldered him high into Armagh City. And that great sporty exhibition, it links today, and that bond is there still in Cork. Up to this very day, you've got young boys and girls now of all ages travelling north and south 3 or 4 times a year. And, you know, it's incredible. When the Cork bowlers arrive in the beautiful rolling green glens of Cady, County Armagh, they feel their home, because they know then they're then at that stage going into the heart of Delaney, Hammerman Donnelly country.
Looking at the Boys of Fairhill, you had Tim Delaney's standard of bowling in at least 8 of these men, if not more. Like, now there was Jack Hasey, and Jack Hasey is the grandfather of the famous Gould brothers. Kieran Gould, Anthony Gould, Michael Gould, they're all fantastic top-line players. Well, their grandfather was actually, he was Timmy Delaney's standard. It was a game that everybody was level, so they all excelled in it. They were great bowl players.
This historic photograph will be 80 years old in the very, very near future, and it is especially important. One of the very interesting things about this picture, that you had drag hunting, you had bird catchers, you had hurlers and footballers, right? You had people of all sports, but every one of them were bowl players. Each and every one of them bowled. And that was the unique part about this picture.
Here's up from ourselves the Boys of Fairhill. So come, boys, and you'll see lads and lassies full of glee, famous for all your great names.
If you look at the background of a lot of those photographs, you'll find that 'tis the North Monastery Science Lab is at the back, you know, at the back, as a kind of a backdrop.
It was a family thing and a family tradition. There was a kind of a shuffling of a pack, of a sporting pack. And in many ways, the photographs were almost identical. Hurlers, harriers, pigeons or bowl playing. They were nearly all the same people. Timmy Delaney and those, they live on in Connie Doyle, you know, and they'll be spoken about, I think, not just now, but in 100 years to come, people in Fairhill will still be bowl playing, still have pigeons, and still be drag hunting.
And they're a proud race of people. They were honest to a man. They worked like slaves, and they gave no quarter, and they received no quarter. They were beaten, but they never lay down. No, and they're still there. You know, that's the Boys of Fairhill.